Mr. President, you are 100 days into your second term. On the gun bill, you put, it seems, everything into it to try to get it passed. Obviously, it didn't. Congress has ignored your efforts to try to get them to undo these sequester cuts. There was even a bill that you threatened to veto that got 92 Democrats in the House voting yes. So my question to you is, do you still have the juice to get the rest of your agenda through this Congress?
Well, if you put it that way, Jonathan, maybe I should just pack up and go home. Golly.
President Obama, a rare appearance there in the White House briefing room, taking some tough questions from the press corps. Jim, it was all kicked off by Fox News chief White House correspondent Ed Henry, who asked the president about his red line on Libya. How did the president do?
Well, I think the president had a very tough week. He's looking feckless on the Syria, whatever you think of the Syria intervention. And by the way, I might add, anybody who thinks that the FBI and Homeland Security did fine on Boston ought to be judged. You really want him managing your Syria liberation operation. But when you see Dana Milbank calling him a bystander, and Peggy Noonan, who's been sympathetic to the president in the past, although is a conservative, saying he's not a lame duck, but he's lame, and most of the mainstream media, I think, kind of agreed. Remember, he's been reelected, so it's okay now to judge him a little more candidly.
Along those lines, on Friday, we learned that the Associated Press is saying that the Department of Homeland Security is now saying that if you're going to have a student visa in the United States, you actually ought to be a student. That's one of the things that's going to be enforced.
Yes, shocking. We remember that from the 9/11 Commission report. That was one of its recommendations, is to do something about this system where we don't know who's in our country and what they're supposedly doing here. Look, I think the media finally caught up with the fact that this was a very unscripted performance by the president this week, and that, more than that, he is not just passive, he was positively defensive. And everything was bad. Problems were hard. Tell us something we don't know, Mr. President.
It seemed sometimes like the Denver presidential debate, set in the White House Brady briefing room. Here is some of the feedback from the press. Washington Post Dana Milbank said, 100 days into his second term, Obama has already lost control of the agenda, if he ever had control in the first place. He ricocheted through his news conference, as he has through his presidency recently, between issues and crises not of his choice. CNN, though, had a very different take on it. President Barack Obama confidently declared that his administration will get things done in Washington despite an atmosphere described as divided and politically dysfunctional. So which of those two descriptions do you agree with, Ellen?
Well, I was just about to go after the CNN one. I'm actually pretty critical of the media on this. And part of that is that it's always the networks that ask questions, and a couple people did deal with that. There was some discussion about that, but nobody really focused on what kind of questions were asked and whether the president really has power or not power and how he's using it. And I'm pretty critical of that, but I think the media could have used it. They all talked about his defensiveness, or they gave him a kiss up, but very few people did a good analysis of that.
Well, there was also criticism of the president's wishy-washy answers, and there are some, he is the president after all.
Yeah, this is the week when the dam really broke and all the media acknowledged what the reality is, which so far the second term has been a fizzle. And there are a couple things going on here. One, ultimately the reality does matter, and the media has to acknowledge it at some level. And also, the media tends to get tired of one narrative, and the narrative of Barack Obama, the conquering hero from the election, had gotten a little shop-worn. And then also the media, there's just this huge herd mentality. So once Dana Milbank and Maureen Dowd are saying it, there's a tendency among all the other liberal journalists to say, well, it must be true.
On the issue of Obamacare being, as Senator Max Baucus called it, a potential train wreck, the Washington Post called the president out on that this week, writing that there were a variety of stories and reports and so forth suggesting that 10 million people may be in line to lose the health care that they have currently as a result of Obamacare. Did that get covered?
Actually, it has. They haven't necessarily connected it to the president, but the Politico and The Hill have been doing stories all week about how the Democrats are running away from the Affordable Care Act and are worried about the 14 midterm elections and so on. I think if the White House is successful, it'll all be Kathleen Sebelius' fault, and the president will be able to focus on, you know, other important issues.
But look, we have 44 months left, right? So we can't exactly call him, as Peggy Noonan did, a kind of quacking lame duck. And Charles Krauthammer said, along comes immigration just when he seems to be failing, and next week he can claim credit for that, even though we know, as Krauthammer pointed out, that the victory is owed more to Republicans being afraid of losing the Hispanic vote than to any leadership on the part of the president. But this media meme is going to turn.
Well, and then he went back to Guantanamo Bay, which was one of the issues early from his first administration.
Well, yes, and, you know, he blamed Congress to some degree. I also, again, blame the media for not going after the length of his answers and the fact that there was not, as you said, questions answered. I mean, that's a little bit filibustering.
Well, all right.
I don't think the immigration thing, I'm sure Rich agrees, I don't think it's any kind of slam dunk at all. I think that could also, amidst all this Boston stuff, turns out on him too.
Rich?
Yeah, well, it's the one major legislative thing that it seems, absent other events, unforeseen events, that could happen, but it won't have anything to do with the president. In fact, it'll have to do with the president staying out of the way.
All right.